webinar. We want to thank you all for joining us today. I'm Jill Rose, your moderator and webinar organizer. I just want to start off with a few housekeeping tips. We have placed everyone on mute just to cut down on any background noise. So if you have any questions, there's a chat box that you can use to type out your questions. We will try to answer all the questions at the end. If you do prefer to ask your question out loud, you can hit the raise your hand button and I'll unmute you so you can ask your question. Now that that's out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's presenter, Mr. Ben Schmerler. Ben's DP Solutions Virtual CIO Consultant. Ben, take it away.
Thank you, Jill. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad you could all attend today to listen to our Phishing Awareness webinar. Most of you probably know who I am, especially if you attended some of our other webinars regarding security and awareness. But what I do with our clients is I focus a little bit more on the why of technology as opposed to the how. And that's usually strategic approaches to managing different things, whether it's picking out a new application or doing vulnerability testing or risk management, things like that. So today what we really want to talk about is phishing. It's a major emerging threat when it comes to IT security and risk management. And if you've ever attended one of our security awareness webinars, one of the major themes we always like to talk about is how any approach to security management has to look at both technical controls and behavioral controls. You know, using technology to fight against threats, but also using proper behaviors and policies so that when threats come to you, that users are equipped to deal with them appropriately, because especially with phishing, a lot of this does come down to the responsibility on the end user to recognize these attacks and manage them properly. And we're going to talk about that stuff today. So before we really get rolling into some of the other topics, I just want to talk about what phishing is, because I think there's a little confusion between the differences with what actually phishing is versus perhaps you know, the consequences of it. You know, things like ransomware and stuff. So everybody probably knows what spam or junk emails are. You know, these aren't necessarily phishing attacks; they're just unwanted or unsolicited emails. And this is a very broad definition, right? I mean, I've heard people call spam, you know, advertisements, and I guess you could consider it that. But basically, it's just junk. And I would imagine that anyone here who has any kind of sophisticated email system is probably using a spam filter, which works pretty effectively for blocking spam. A little less so in terms of fighting against phishing attempts, which we'll talk about in a second. But phishing is a little bit different. It's a type of spam, and it's really specific to cyber attacks. It's really exploiting the end user's behavior to allow them to give them something. Either it's collecting personal information, usually for identity theft, or to infect you with some kind of bad application, malware, ransomware, spyware, whatever, that it could be used. That could be used later for more nefarious means. Spear phishing is just a variation of this. Now, spear phishing is what you would call perhaps what happened at the DNC last year, which is, you know, the technique is fairly similar to phishing. The goal is to to exploit an end user, but it's much more personal. So it may have your name in it. It may have an account number or a very formal signature. It's not as general. And I've got some examples I'll show in a sec. It's very tough for spam filters to stop these kind of attempts, because the way spam filters work is, you know, they score emails based on various threat levels, the sender, the content in the email, so on and so forth, in order to block that message from hitting the user's inbox. Well, if it's really personalized, coming from a fairly trusted recipient, or what it thinks is a trusted recipient, with language that doesn't seem as garbled as a typical spam email or stuff like that, that may get through your spam filter. Spam filters are unfortunately only so sophisticated. These things are socially engineered in order to elicit a response. They're trying to play on your insecurities, your personal insecurities, in order to get you to click through and give them what they want. And the goal, again, is usually not necessarily the end user, but using that end user to create a much bigger consequence for the organization. And with that, we're going to turn to our first poll question with Jill, and we've got a couple for that.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, we just want to know, have you or anyone you know ever been phished? Trying to get a gauge of how prevalent this is. So you can select all that apply if you have, if someone you know has, if no one you know has, or if you're not sure. Okay, we'll give everyone a few more seconds to go ahead and answer. Great. And let's see what the results are. It looks like pretty well split between someone has and someone you know has.
Not really a surprise to me. Phishing, as I said, is a very much an emerging threat. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the people in the it hasn't happened to me or hasn't happened to somebody I know column thinks it hasn't happened, but it has. Maybe if the consequences weren't related necessarily turned back to a phishing attempt, but it very well could have been. One of the stats I'm going to show in a little bit will speak to that in a second. All right, let's resume here. So here are a few statistics specifically about phishing and where we're at today in terms of a threat. So between October 2015 and March 2016, the Anti-Phishing Working Group, and you can check them out. They have a website with a lot of good information, for the public about phishing. They reported a 250% increase in phishing websites. That is to say, like landing pages where a user might click through and they have the fake website where they're collecting information, and that's just between 6 months or so. That's a 250% increase, and the reason for this is that phishing is really easy to organize. It's a very cheap attack to pull off, and it's really a numbers game, so it's becoming quite popular. In Q1 2016, there were almost 290,000 phishing attacks, and almost half of them were just in March. So we were talking a 250% increase in that 6-month period. Well, month to month to month, it's increasing exponentially. There were about 230,000 unique phishing campaigns, that is to say, different kinds of phishing messages sent with different variations on attacks in January 2016 to February and March of that same year. The FBI said that in October of 2013 through February 2016, so maybe 2.5 years, they received reports from 17,000 victims, which totaled more than $2.3 billion in losses. As a matter of fact, this hits kind of close to home. We had a client that was victimized for a phishing attack on their email, and due to the nature of the consequences, which was a series of personal and financial data getting out, the FBI did get involved and asked questions regarding this for a client. And again, all it took was an exploitation of their email system. The truth is that I'm showing all these numbers. These are known numbers, but I'm a little more pessimistic about this. I think the extent of the damage could be much worse. I mean, I would certainly expect we're talking a lot of corporate users, but I can't imagine that a lot of personal users with home PCs that aren't managed, haven't been victimized by this. Maybe they don't even know it, or maybe they thought it was, oh, I just got a virus, but really it was because they clicked through the wrong email, or that credit card fraud that they had on their Visa that month was actually from a phishing scheme, and they didn't even realize it. They just sort of dealt with it as they would deal with any sort of credit card fraud. So here's an example of what I would call very regular generic phishing, and this is, I believe this came from University of Pittsburgh, and this was a phishing attack that happened to them. They've made some edits to it, of course. And you can see the subject here is help desk and support updates. Very generic subject. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you guys got legitimate emails that had similar subjects. Dear user, your webmail account has been violated. log in, it gives us an IP address. In this case, 123456789 is not a real IP address, but it gave an IP address that was legitimate, and it said that they accessed your personal webmail. So all you need to do is just click through here and confirm some stuff for us and verify. And that's thanks from technical support. This is a little bit obvious here. It's being sent to user, not a specific person. I had to edit this a little bit to remove some personal info, but the email address it came from is bizarre. Normally when an email comes, it doesn't say technical support. It says so-and-so person from technical support, so on and so forth. But when you click through the link, this is what you see. This probably looks pretty familiar to anybody who's used Outlook Web Access. I used this in the past. I imagine most of our clients have. Outlook Web Access is a very popular way for people to check Exchange-based email on the web. And you may notice that this doesn't look at all different, and that's because that's the idea. They're creating a landing page that is designed to mimic the graphical user interface of the typical Outlook Web Access portal. What they're trying to do here is they're trying to get you to give them your username, which is your email address, and your password. Especially if you're in an Active Directory environment where you use a single sign-in to get into your system, your email files, etc. That's a very powerful piece of information, right? It's not just their email they're trying to get in. They want other stuff too, or perhaps to infect you with something. All it takes is to enter that information. You click that sign-in button, and now your information is available and probably being auctioned off, sold, whatever. Here's another example, and this is just a general example. I don't have the specific stuff. You may have heard of a tech company called EMC. They do major storage technology solutions. They got emails to their staff with an Excel file that was labeled 2011 recruitment plan. Sounds kind of legit, right? Recruitment plan. Yeah, we're doing a recruitment plan. But when you click it, it had malware embedded into it. So these waves or emails were sent to their entire staff, or I guess their whole database of email addresses. This was not a high-profile user. This was just anybody. They were trying to exploit anybody they could. The specific malware looked for a vulnerability that existed in Adobe Flash. If you're not familiar with Adobe Flash is a plugin or a tool that plays certain types of videos and stuff in a browser. Like anything else, Adobe Flash gets patched and updated and has flaws in it. And so this malware exploited that vulnerability, which then harvested credentials of the system. So it wasn't just trying to attack their email or something, but actually getting access into the system to an outside party. And then it threatened the security of their organization, the integrity of their data, partners they work with, including defense contractors. Basically, they unlock the door for people to go in and do whatever they want. Now, really, one of the things to keep in mind is the level of the user. Well, one of the things I mentioned in risk analysis and such is that we really should do the minimum necessary standard, make sure that staff members have the level of rights that they need, and this is one reason why. Let's say a phishing attack happens across the scope of your organization, and it catches somebody. Well, much better that that user have limited access to limited things so the damage is minimized. When you give too many people too many rights, it's not just about what they might do, it's about what may happen if their account is exploited, whether it's that user's fault or not. So we'll talk about a little about that stuff more. I'm going to pivot to spear phishing, and you'll notice in this example that it's a little tougher to identify, and this is from Lehigh University. So you'll see here at the top, we've got from this guy, Doug Williams. Everybody knows Doug, although his email address is a little weird. Chris, PID@tonline.d. I think that's a Denmark domain, if I'm not mistaken, to J, which is just some random thing. I guess that's a censored email, actually. Notice this even states specifically, this is a private message for the controller of Lehigh University. So it's specifying exactly who it's trying to target And that it even says if it's not used, ignore or discard. It's trying to lower your defenses and lower your worries by making itself sound legitimate. It even has a subject, invoice for Lehigh University. I mean, everything about this is personalized. It's got a real name here, and that since we do not have a termination letter, here's an invoice, just some number. Just let us know, early withdrawal. Refer to the attached document for billing information. Thanks from our good pal Doug in Albuquerque, New Mexico, by way of Denmark, apparently. That attachment, of course, embedded with malware. And I believe they caught this in time, but this was definitely a pretty risky threat and very personalized, very easy to see how someone might click through this without knowing the consequences of their actions. So here's a few things to look out with that distinguish spear phishing. As I said, it's much more personal. This was a controller, financial services. It used the name, it used their department, where they're from. An actual name instead of a salutation. The language is very tight. Notice in the first example when we're talking about the Outlook web access stuff, it was dear user, suspicious activity from tech support, very robotic. This didn't seem very robotic. This seems like something that somebody would say to you in natural conversation. It refers a fake invoice number, so it's referring to something that seems legit. And it talks about a consequence. You better do this right now or else something's going to happen to you, right? It's trying to scare you. It first lowers your defenses by saying it's specifically for you, and then even further lowers your defenses by putting urgency so that you trust it more. The email signature here actually has a guy's name with a phone number. Well, I mean, the truth is, though, that if I wanted to find someone's contact information, especially a public person, someone who works in a business, that's pretty easy to find, but this spear phishing attempt used that. And I'm going to pivot now to our next question with Jill, or poll questions.
Thank you, Ben. Okay. Do you think true or false, phishing can only be done through email? Do you think that's true, false, or you're not sure? Okay, looks like we're getting about half of everyone has voted. Give everyone a few more minutes, a few more seconds, sorry. Okay, let's see here. And 77% of you think that it's false, 23% don't know, but no one thinks it's true.
Well, it's kind of a trick question. Sometimes we throw those little trick questions in there. I guess we're trying to bait you a little bit, just like a phishing attempt. We're baiting you. The truth is that phishing, it's very often email. I mean, I should minimize that. Email is a very preferred target, but really all it needs is a means to communicate with the end user to get them to click through. In fact, there's another variation on phishing that's coming out. You can Google this. It's called Vishing, V-I-S-H-I-N-G. That's voicemail phishing. You guys may have gotten phone calls on your cellular phones about some account information or something wrong with your card, or I've heard people get, someone I know personally got a phone call and they said, oh, we're from Microsoft and we noticed something weird on your computer. All the phishing attempt is meant to do is be a communication method to get the end user to do something they wouldn't otherwise do if they knew the motivations of the person. So voicemail, web pop-ups, email, instant messages, perhaps Skype messages, any number of things, probably stuff I'm forgetting about right now, but it's very pervasive. So the number one thing is have a little skepticism, especially when someone asks you for something. We'll get into some of that stuff a little bit later. Jill, do I have the screen again?
Yes, it's showing your screen.
Great. So fighting against phishing. So this is very complicated because there isn't really a silver bullet to fight this. But there are things you can do to really minimize your risks. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the WannaCry attack. I imagine many of the people on the call today are familiar with what happened a few weeks ago. And this really popped up in the UK, the National Health Service, where a piece of ransomware called WannaCry infected a number of machines. And it's believed, although I don't think I have the facts completely outlined yet, that this may have come from a phishing attempt that exploited a user. And there were things that could have been done to avoid this. So I really look at this as three pillars. The first is education. What do users know about phishing, like what we're doing today? How do users recognize what a phishing attempt is so that they are empowered to act appropriately? Technology. Absolutely, positively, everybody who cares about their security should have patch management, antivirus, anti-malware, good spam filtering. There are proxy solutions and web, things that make browsing a little safer that can help sometimes avoid you landing on the landing pages that the phishing attempts bring you to. Mobile device management, I would say, if you are in fact using cellular phones to do your email or major communications with sensitive data. Even behavioral tools. We use a product sometimes for clients that does policy management. And so if, for example, you set up this tool to say, I would like you to flag every time someone tries to email a social security number or credit card number or an invoice or something like that. These sorts of behavioral tools can catch the behavior in the act and try and prevent it, or at least verify that this is in fact what the user intends to do and document it. But technology is just another part. The last piece I would say is communication, which is to say, in the event of a phishing attack, which is very likely to happen, that your staff is well equipped to communicate internally and externally, that chain of command is really there to deal with the security incidents, that everyone is familiar, that people don't go too far, that they go just to the point that they need to go to. So let's first talk a little bit more about education. So security awareness training. If you haven't attended any of the webinars I've done on security awareness, I know I've also done personal security awareness trainings for our Confidence Plus customers who need a little more personalized training, where I come in and I chat with people about major threats, and then do a little personalized discussions where we talk about them specifically and things they should be aware of in light of their compliance and security concerns. I really encourage that because when people are aware of the threats, they tend to behave better. There needs to be a real acknowledgement of acceptable use policies, especially if you haven't put one together yet. Acceptable use is essentially the rules of engagement with technology. It speaks to things like where you're allowed to browse, what emails you're allowed to open, what you're allowed to actually communicate via email, what computers you're allowed to use, the rules about using personal devices with company data, things like that. Just here are the guidelines for what you're allowed to do with the tech. And of course, recognizing phishing emails before you click through them. So obviously, typos, odd font, strange language, emails that request passwords or other personal information. An email that asks for this information is highly suspect, because they're really, when you're asking for things like passwords or personal information, a casual email really shouldn't cut it. There should be a little bit more process to asking for this information if in fact it is needed by a third party. Odd to or from lines. You saw even on the spear phishing attempt that the email said it was from that guy, I think Doug Williams was his name, but it had a weird .de domain on it. The to was to just some random list. The same goes for the subject line. If it's stuff that's bizarre, that should raise a flag for you. Any message that claims you must do this now is highly suspect. Certainly there are emails that are time sensitive that require this level of urgency. But again, if something is saying that this is super urgent, you need to act and not think about it, maybe you should think about it and certainly double check. One thing I do recommend to people, if there's something that is setting off any of the alarms in your head, something that's cause for concern, it shows your instincts, it strikes your instincts, maybe the good idea is to double check. So somebody says, I need somebody's W-2, and you never really email W-2s to that person. It's a good idea to give them a phone call and say, hey, I got this request from you via email. It's saying you want a W-2 as an attachment. I'm okay to do this, but did you send this? Did you actually send this to me? And they may say no. And then at least you've looked out for it. But if they say yes, well, then you know what the you know that it's verified and you can act with some confidence. One thing you can do, although there may need to be some edits to this because there may be even ways to exploit this. If you see a URL in an email, a link, sometimes it says click here to open your account or click here to log into your account. In Outlook at least, and a lot of other email clients, if you don't click on the link but you hover over the link, a little pop-up will go over your little mouse pointer and it'll say, here's the actual URL that you're going to. And when you think you're clicking on the link to go to Amazon and instead you see some weird, bizarre domain name and all this other stuff, well, that's not Amazon, and maybe they're trying to phish you. That's something you can do, and it's really helpful to avoid those phishing attacks. If a website, and this is even not just a phishing idea, but in general, if it is not an encrypted website, which is to say, you see that it says HTTPS instead of HTTP, you shouldn't be entering any sensitive information into it, period. A site that is HTTPS has some encryption on it so that the communication you send to it is encrypted in transit. People can't read it. More to the point, if a landing page that is illegitimate is less likely to be encrypted because the end user, the person setting it up, isn't going to have it. Now, that's not to say that HTTPS sites are completely safe, but if it's not HTTPS, you probably shouldn't be entering personal information on it, period. Read the entire URL. One letter off could be a phishing website. It could be a .net instead of a .com. It could be a, they just transpose 2 letters or misspell something. These attacks are pretty seditious that way. If possible, and again, this is very hard given who we are and what we're trying to do right now, especially with social media, you really should limit the publicly available personal information within reason. Pardon me. If there's information out there on your social media, it's fine to have your email address out there, but keep in mind that the more public your email address is, the more people might see it and the more phishing attempts may come to you. That said, we are in an interconnected world. Keeping the lines of communication open are important. Just keep in mind that you don't just need to broadcast stuff anywhere and everywhere. Only do it when it really matters. Something else, and this is something we've done internally here, and we could do for our clients, is simulated phishing attempts. Essentially, a fake phishing email is sent. It exhibits some of the qualities of a phishing campaign, but without the actual consequences. The email is sent to all staff. Just so you know, I can only do it with actual domain names, not like Google accounts or Yahoo accounts or whatever. But essentially, a fake email is set up. It may ask for a password. It may ask you to verify something, and that's sent to the staff. And we keep statistics on who opened it, who clicked through it, and what happens is if someone actually clicks through it and falls for the phishing test, there's a landing page and it says, hey, you fell for it. This was a fake phishing test, and here's some things you should look out for in the future so that you're a little bit more prepared to deal with this in the future and that you don't fall for a real phishing attack. This is good, though, because there are actually studies that measure this stuff, that organizations that do phishing testing tend to have less issues because the people who fall for it the first time tend to be more diligent the second time. So it's something we can do, and happy to explore that after the call. Technology. Maintain your equipment properly. This is really, really important. Getting back to the WannaCry issue that happened a couple weeks ago, one of the major issues was that there was an exploit that Microsoft patched on March 14th of this year that was not patched on a number of machines that got infected with WannaCry. So this ransomware that was pushed out to all of these devices, and if the devices had been patched properly, they wouldn't have been the victims of that ransomware in all likelihood. Now, it certainly could have happened with other ransomware tools, but you certainly lower your risk considerably. So as I said, having good patch management, up-to-date web browsers, antivirus, operating systems, it's so important when fighting these phishing attacks. If you're not using patch management, chances are you are missing out on dealing with some of these exploits that are out there. Relying on the automatic patching is simply not effective enough. I've done any number of vulnerability tests for our clients, and I will say that there is a clear relationship between clients who use patch management tools to lower those risks and limit the amount of exploits that are available versus those who don't. And just relying on the Windows tools to get updates out there, frankly, is just not enough. I always find things missing. I just completed a recent assessment, and during my delivery, I was kind of curious. I looked for the specific exploit that WannaCry used, and I looked through some reports, and lo and behold, some of the machines for this client were missing the patch because they didn't have a patch management solution. You want to block the idea of doing these patch management things is that it actually blocks the exploit that malware targets. You know, if a piece of malware is specifically designed to attack an exploit that doesn't exist on your computer, well, the effectiveness of that ransomware is nullified, at least in that case. Vulnerability testing. So it's not enough to really just do the maintenance, but also do some vulnerability testing every so often, because we want to see what exploits are actually out there that could be taken advantage of. And there's always going to be some vulnerabilities on PCs, but we want to keep those vulnerabilities to low severity and low volume. If there are only a few vulnerabilities and those vulnerabilities are fairly low risk, that's acceptable. What's not acceptable is having dozens upon dozens upon dozens of high severity vulnerabilities that are just not being dealt with. But you need that vulnerability testing in order to verify what is actually being completed. It's certainly not unheard of that even a managed client who has all these services has a PC that for some reason is missing patches, or the patches aren't applying right, or whatever. And then when you do vulnerability testing, you discover that there's more work to be done on those machines. Strong password rules and reset policy. So if someone steals your credentials, they have access to your system. Unless there needs to be some other control that says, hey, every so often we're changing our passwords, and we're going to change it every 90 days, and that the passwords have to be, 8 characters, upper or lowercase, symbols, so on and so forth. Not just that, you may even consider, for remote access in particular, multi-factor authentication, which would require not just a username and a password, but a changing token, so that if somebody did get your username and password, that they can't get in without another piece of information that only you hold. Maybe it's a little app on your phone, or a little token device that sits on a keychain or something like that. This lowers your risk of having an account exploited from ransomware, from a phishing attack, dramatically. User rights management. I alluded to this earlier. We want to make sure that users have the right to access what they need and nothing else. I would rather somebody, you really don't want to have a ransomware or a phishing attack at any time, but a user with low-level rights is much less damaging than a user who is exploited with high-level rights that can do a lot more. Application control. Every application you load onto a computer is one other thing to patch, one other thing to exploit, one other thing to manipulate. We talked about the EMC example with Adobe Flash. Now, most people need Adobe Flash to operate, but if you don't have the application that they're trying to exploit, then they can't exploit it. The more you load up, the more it is to maintain. A computer is not an unlimited bucket of stuff. It's everything you put in needs to get that maintenance. So I would strongly recommend that if you don't really need an application, it probably shouldn't be installed on the PC. That's not to say, I don't want you could go too far on the other side. We don't want you to remove applications simply because you only use them once in a while. You should have things that you need, but certainly not just installing things willy-nilly. There are DNS and proxy solutions to block potential phishing sites. Well, wouldn't it be nice if that we showed you that Outlook web access example where someone clicks through and they reach that fake Outlook page. It's nice if you have a solution like, we offer OpenDNS, where a lot of these sites that are seen as potentially hazardous or insecure, sometimes, not always, can be blocked by a good solution like that. So that when you click through that link, OpenDNS or something says, hey, this site has been blocked by your administrator. Contact the administrator for more information or whatever. This is a great thing because someone did fall for the phishing attempt, but fortunately we had another layer of security to block it. Again, though, relying on this comprehensively, just saying, well, I have OpenDNS so I don't have to worry about it, I think is a little foolish because even OpenDNS is far from perfect when it comes to this stuff. Communication is the third spoke I mentioned. A security incident policy is very important. So it's pretty likely that someone on this call today will experience some kind of phishing or ransomware or some sort of major attack. And because of that, it's really important that there is a policy in place that outlines, because this happened, here's what you do, here's who you communicate with, and here's how it's handled moving forward. Everybody should be responsible for adhering to that policy and acknowledging that policy. That policy should be reviewed by management every so often to make sure it still speaks to the way the organization is run. Things like that. It's the amount of damage that an attack can cause it can either be exacerbated or diminished based on the way staff handles the attack at the time of the attack. So in a policy, you want to speak to what constitutes an incident, who do users report to internally, what does the internal resource responsible for security do, who do they talk to, and almost as important as everything else, how are incidents followed up for future outcomes that are better? So what could the organization have done in the future to prevent this sort of thing from happening? Do we need to buy something else? Do we need to reiterate our security awareness training? Do we need to update our policies? Do we need mobile device management? What is the key thing that we could have done to stop this? If we could have, sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes there's nothing that you could have done, but oftentimes there is, and we want to try and refine the process so we get better outcomes. It's really also important to warn others within your organization and other contacts. So if you feel like you've been exploited, it's probably a good time to talk to people that you might share data with. Say, hey, we had this issue. If you get any bizarre emails from us in the next few days, just be aware that it may not be us. Give us a call, so on and so forth. I mentioned this earlier. If an email is suspicious but you are questioning its legitimacy, it's important to reach out to that person and ask if it's legitimate. Did you actually send this? Phone calls are pretty good for that. I want to talk about the next steps, things that you can do right now to help minimize the risk of phishing and where we can help you. So the first is the basic phishing test. This is a pretty basic, simple exercise. If you're interested, you can contact someone here after the call. All we really require is a list of email addresses, and I would want to speak with management about a good time. We kind of want to keep this in the dark a little bit. We don't want people to know when their phishing test is going to come. We just want to do it and see what the results are. But once we have that list of email addresses, we can create what's called a phishing campaign. I have a few templates I use that are designed to trick people, and a landing page I would set up, and basically we pick a time to send it out, it's sent, and I go back into the portal every so often and view who's seen it and report back to management about the status there. It's a pretty simple task, but doing it every so often can help educate users. Vulnerability testing, I believe, is pretty necessary for just about everyone. The frequency of these vulnerability tests is perhaps varies based on your compliance level, risk level, security level. But if you haven't done vulnerability testing before, not just on the perimeter, but on the machines themselves in particular when it comes to phishing, I would say that this is a good exercise to do. I would come in either with a flash drive to run the test locally on PCs or use a domain controller to push it out. But this could be a good education and see where the actual exploits are on machines. If there are things that could be done different with support and maintenance to help keep those vulnerability levels lowered. This is a good exercise even for people who have these support things in place, because it's sort of the the verification of that what we're doing is appropriate. And if things need to be tweaked, which they often do, that we have some visibility on how they need to be tweaked. It's really important that you have a policy review, that your policy speaks to the things I mentioned before, acceptable use, security incidents, etc. If you're not speaking to these things now with your staff, then chances are they're going to be using a lot of their own judgment to take things on, and it's not necessarily that staff wants to do bad things, but that without the education, without the policy, the rules in place, they may make improper judgments when they could have done things a little bit better. And of course, have a discussion with your CRM. So as always, with any of these webinars, we like to leave room at the end to have a little bit of a Q&A session, allow you to speak to concerns that you have. If there's anything that I didn't cover here, specific items, things you want to hear more about, I'm happy to answer them. And again, this could speak to security in general. If you're not sure if it applies to phishing, feel free to ask anyway. If we have to take it offline for a little bit more in-depth conversation, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, great. And as a reminder, if you have a question, you can type it in the box, and we will answer it for you. Okay, looks like we do have one question, Ben. Is phishing more of a concern for PCs or for mobile devices?
Well, really, this speaks to the need for mobile device management in general. So whatever I say, I examine a threat, we need to look at the entire workflow. Most organizations these days have staff that uses company-owned PCs and personally owned cell phones. I mean, that's just the way things are typically. So if you're using that cell phone to answer email, maybe forward email, look at sensitive data, so on and so forth, then it doesn't really matter where that email, where you're opening that email. You could be the victim of a phishing threat. There are definitely ransomware, crypto locker sort of things that will attack cell phones. There are exploits, phishing attempts that target cell phones specifically. There are apps that you download in the App Store that may get exploited and then have a piece of malware attached to them. So I would say that phishing is most definitely a threat for any device that you use that handles sensitive data. I think we have another question.
Okay, great. Yes, we do. It looks like Julie has a question. Julie, I'm going to unmute you. Julie Simmons. Okay, you can ask your question, Julie. Okay. We'll give Julie another minute. Let's see here. Okay, another question that came in that is typed is, what is DNS?
Okay, yes. DNS, I believe it stands for Domain Name Service. So think about how, everybody here, they've driven on the road before. How do you know where to go, right? How do I know how to get from Baltimore to Washington, or how do I know how to get from Baltimore to Miami or whatever? Well, there's signs on the road that tell you that you take 695 to 95 to 495, and that's how you get to DC or whatever. And DNS is kind of like the roadmap, the directions for the internet. Everything on the internet is IPs, right? It's like digits that route information from place to place to place. When you type in google.com, your web browser doesn't really know where that goes. Google.com is a domain that points to an IP address. DNS is basically drawing that path for your data to travel so that your computer actually knows where well, not even your computer, but routers on the internet know where that data is meant to go. The reason OpenDNS is a good name for the product is that it speaks to controlling the direction of data, where it ends up going. So that is what DNS is. Everybody needs to have DNS, of course, but DNS could also be used to exploit you.
Okay, great. Hopefully that answers the question. Next question is from Tom Hurl. How do you combat ransomware like WannaCry?
How do you combat ransomware like WannaCry? Well, a few specific ways. One is, to be perfectly honest, a lot of our clients didn't experience consequences from this WannaCry attack. And a major reason for that is that our patch management solution identified that patch back in March as a critical patch, and that patch was applied, and we have a system in place here to verify that those patches were run. So something that for a lot of organizations could have been very serious, for a lot of our clients was well taken care of, and I was really happy to see that. Jill can probably tell you that Friday that I was kind of freaking out a little bit because I saw this news on the web about this WannaCry attack, and I'm thinking, what if this happens to one of our clients, things like that. But we were pretty safe. Obviously, at the same time, you need to have good antivirus, anti-malware that can maybe block these kinds of attacks from a client level, from an endpoint level. So stuff like that. That was a very, very big one where I thought that the management and maintenance of computers was really important. The other thing is not just patch management, but having supportable equipment. So Windows XP, for example, there are a number of exploits that are completely unpatched right now for Windows XP. And the longer that Windows XP exists, which I guess it always will, the more people will peel back the layers of that operating system and find things that can be exploited on it. So Microsoft really isn't doing anything about Windows XP. They did for the WannaCry attack, which was a special circumstance, and I imagine that they probably didn't even want to do that because it sort of opens up a rabbit hole. They don't want to encourage people to use old equipment, but old, non-supported equipment gets riskier and riskier and riskier every day you operate it. There really is an end of life when it comes to these things, especially on the software perspective, so I would highly recommend taking care of that if you haven't already.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ben. And we have one more question in, is do we contact Ben for phishing testing directly?
I would say you should contact your CRM. I would want to have that conversation with them involved. You can certainly reach out to me to ask questions and things like that, but I like to keep the dialogue open. I want the CRMs, account managers, et cetera. I want them here to understand what the conversation is, so it's ongoing. I don't want to be the guy who holds all the information about what our clients are concerned about. I want everybody to know about it. So I would reach out to them, and then we can have like a conference call or something, or an in-person meeting or whatever, where we could talk about these things a little more specifically as it pertains to you, and not just phishing, but your general risk management strategy. And we can really dig in a little bit more about a lot of these subjects that we're talking about today, and perhaps others.
Okay, great. And Julie's asking, Julie, we'll let you know who your CRM is offline. And that looks like all the questions that we have. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have right now.
There we go. For some reason, the slides didn't go. So here's our email and contact information. I also, on our LinkedIn, we're posting a lot of information about, threats like phishing, like other things. I try and always give us new material. I strongly believe that educating the end users that we support is a really, really important part of IT security and management. I really, really do encourage our clients to communicate with us. Answering questions is something that it may be hard to measure, but I believe really lowers the incidence of security events that happen for our clients. So I want to continue this dialogue. And if there's ever any other topics that you feel like these educational webinars could be used to teach your staff, to teach people about threats that are out there, just let us know, because we're always looking to find new ways to educate our clients, and we want to be a part of that dialogue.
Okay, one more question did come in. Should I take my office email off of my phone?
The answer is maybe. So a few ways to look at this. First is, what are you doing with your email? So are you just sending casual messages, things that if that was exploited, or if you're just doing casual things with your device and it was exploited, how worried are you about the consequences, right? If there's no risk to you, well, then it's hard to establish a real risk management profile for that. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you are doing sensitive things on your cell phone. I wouldn't say that the solution is necessarily to remove it from your cell phone, because this is the world we live in. People use smartphones. People, I know myself, I have this webinar right now. I have a meeting this afternoon. I have a conference call. If I didn't have my smartphone, I'd be a much less productive person. But what we have here at DPS to manage this is mobile device management. So if I, for example, left my phone on a cab or a plane or whatever, they could wipe the census data from my phone. If it forces certain security on it, it can force applications to be loaded on it, so on and so forth. Mobile device management, I think, if you're handling company data that is really important and really sensitive, I almost feel like it's essential to have on a smartphone. But the good news is that mobile device management, it's not like the most expensive security solution in the world. But given the fact that mobile devices are not really centrally managed most of the time, that they're individually owned, that they could be of any variety of devices from, different kinds of Android phones, different kinds of iPhones, I think if you're doing important stuff on that and you're concerned about the security of that, mobile device management is essential. And we're talking about phishing right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if over the next couple of years there is an increased focus on hacks on phones and exploiting them to get information. I mean, it's already happening, but I think the focus isn't quite there yet. And it's kind of surprising to me. I don't know. I think everyone wants to talk about phishing and stuff like that, and that's really important. But the mobile devices are one of the most unmanaged pieces for most organizations I deal with.
Okay,
I hope that
excellent.
answered the question.
I think so. I just want to let everybody know that we will be sending out a copy of this recording later today. If you do want a copy of the slide deck as well, just like a PDF, you can send an email and let us know. Also, we are having in about 2 weeks a Lunch and Learn, Combat Ransomware Lunch and Learn. That's featuring one of our security partners, Datto. They'll be coming in to present along with us. So it's June 29th, 11:30 to 1:30. You can find a link to register on our events page on our website, or it's just dpsolutions.com/ransomwarelunch. So we certainly hope that you can join us for that if you're available. And with that, I believe that concludes today's presentation. We want to thank everyone for joining us today. Feel free to follow up if you have any additional questions via email, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Thanks everybody so much, everybody.